This is Professor Mike Shore, and welcome to a short tutorial from Chapter 10 in our textbook for the spring semester. What we're doing today with this tutorial is showing you how the first part of our problem set, test scores number 1, is written and the reasons for using different aspects of the C++ programming language. Once you've got that down and working, then you can move on to determine how to solve the second part of this problem, test scores number 2. So let's look at the problem itself. That's always an important part of this. I don't think some of you have been giving enough time to. Figuring out what's required of the application is vitally important. So what we're going to do is write a program that's going to allocate an array that's big enough to hold a user-defined number of test scores. Then, once all the test scores are entered, the array should be passed to a function that sorts them in ascending order, and then another function should be called that calculates the average score. The program should display the sorted list of scores and averages with appropriate headings. We're going to use a pointer notation throughout rather than array notation whenever possible. The only input validation is that we're not going to allow positive or negative test scores, which makes sense, right? You don't have negative test scores. So let's move on to the code. Our include section is only got two things, an IOStream reference and a reference to a library called algorithm, and that's needed for the sort algorithm we're going to use, and obviously we're going to use the namespace standard. Our function prototype is the double of average, which returns a double score array with a size variable which tells anything touching the score array how big it is. As we move into the main function of our application, we just have a few variables that we're going to use. Number of scores, obviously. We need to take that input from the user. Double pointer test score, a pointer to the dynamically allocated array of scores, and then finally the double average. Again, these are just a few things that we need for housekeeping and solving the problem. So I'm going to move down a little bit. First thing we're going to do is determine the number of scores and allocate the array within our system memory. So we just need to do an output to the user, asking him or her, asking them to enter the number of scores. We take that in, and then we allocate an array of that size. Pretty straightforward stuff so far. Next thing we need to do is actually get the scores from the user, and we're going to ask them to enter the number of scores separated by spaces. We're going to have a pointer to the current test score. Okay, that's the next value to be read. Then we're going to use a for loop. Pretty standard stuff, right? You should be very familiar with this and thinking about it before I even got there. So we're going to use a variable k. If you haven't figured this out already, pretty standard notation is to use the variables I, j, and k for the counter variables in these for loops. So we're going to go from 0 to less than number of scores. Again, 0 indexed is always the way to go with this. So we're going to do a cin to pointer p, and we're going to make sure that this thing is positive. Remember, we have one validation to do, and that's that the variable is positive. Okay, so now we've got that taken care of. Then we increment the pointer and we keep moving on so we get through all of the score inputs. We're going to echo back the scores to the user. Just go through a real quick for loop to dump out a list of the scores to the user. Then we're going to sort the scores using the STL sort library function. This is pretty straightforward. This is why you like to use pre-built library functions as opposed to coming up with your own, especially for complex things like sorting. Then the next thing we need to do is we're going to calculate the average with our function that we defined as a prototype. Then we're just going to print the output with headers. Remember, it's always important, just don't dump numbers or text to a screen for a user. Always tell them or reminding them, either way, of what they're actually getting thrown back onto the screen for them. And again, this is a list of the sorted scores and the average value. The average value is calculated, as you might imagine, just by taking the sum of all of the values and dividing by the number. In this case, we're going to take a double sum, set it to 0, and then just set about adding them all up. And then dividing by size and returning that double value to the main program. And that's pretty much it. So let's go ahead and see how this works. I'm going to go ahead and just run this real quick. And let me move this over so we can see it on your screens. So I'm just going to do a short number of these. So I'm going to do 5 test scores. So I'm going to do 88.5, 90.0, 65.5. Somebody had a bad day. Let's just go ahead and give it some more numbers. Ooh, and to finish off the semester, somebody had a really good day. So I hit enter. It dumps back the scores just as they were entered and listed sorted scores from low to high. As it said in the example, it said ascending. So that is important. Okay, you must meet the standard of it. And again, the average is 85.5. So we're all good. And that's all there is to solving the first assignment this week. And at this point, you would wrap this up as a zip file or a RAR file and submit them as part of your assignment. The next step will be all on you, and that is to complete test scores number 2. Good luck with that, and make sure you ask questions if you run into any problems with that. This has been Mike Shore, trying to get you going with using pointers, which is still, even today, an important aspect